the Marvel Cinematic Universe took something like the Eternals, right? Which wasn't a blockbuster compared to what they had been getting with Captain America and the Avengers and all these other things, and they decided, let's cut back, right? Let's try to really focus on what we're good at. And what they said they were good at was Avengers movies, Captain America movies, Iron Man movies, and so let's just make those characters again with a different face, rather than focusing on the... Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers, for storytellers, so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite co-hosts, Andrew, to review a 2021 American superhero film. We are reviewing Eternals. Some of you may be wondering why. Some of you may be asking yourself why you're even listening to this podcast at this point. Well, you know, we gotta release content. So here you go. Nah, I mean, we've been going through the Marvel stuff if you've been listening to us at all, so we figured we'd give each movie its own shake, including the stuff that was not rated well when it came out originally, and that includes the Eternals. So that's what we're going through today. The story is by Ryan Firpo and Kaz Firpo, and the screenplay is by Chloe Zhao, Patrick Burley, and the two we mentioned previously, and it was directed by Chloe Zhao. So, getting into those initial impressions, Andrew, what are your thoughts and rating for Eternals?
I have so many mixed thoughts about this movie. I feel like they tried to do something grand with it. Just didn't translate well. That's the best way for me to put it in the short term. My rating was 4.3.
Oh, wow, okay. That's higher than I thought you were gonna give it. Not gonna lie there. That's funny. No, my initial impression was somewhat similar, actually. I had heard really bad things about this movie. I've never seen it before watching it to review on this podcast, and I had very, very low expectations, right? This is gonna be some silly gobbledygook that Marvel spat out. And then I watched it and I went, well, okay, there's actually some merit to what they were trying here. It's got a couple interesting things, and there's actually some things, believe it or not, I liked about this film. But there is also a lot of very serious problems with it, and it's one of those films that I think devolves a lot by the end of the film. So we'll get into that, but before we do that, if you are curious and have not watched the film, Andrew, can you give... Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even say my rating. I got a 4.85. So, actually not that far off from Andrew, about a half a point more than him, and we'll see why today. So, before we get into that, you want to give that summary of what Eternals is about, Andrew?
Eternals follows the story of, I think, 9 beings that are created and sent to Earth in, 7,000 BC or 5,000 BC? Sometime around there. Their job is to protect humanity from deviants, and as time progresses, they think they've killed them all, and they realize they haven't. They've come back and they've killed their leader. As their leader's little token is given to someone else, they realize that their mission to Earth was different than what they originally thought. They're only there to make sure humanity expands enough so that a celestial can be born and wipe off everyone off the face of the planet. It's just a giant egg and incubator for a celestial being. They decide not to, and then there's a fight at the end because some of them think they should.
Nice. Yeah, pretty much. And when it's put like that, honestly, this is one of those films where you put it like that, it doesn't sound too good. But I think the premise that you get initially with how they reveal things isn't half bad. So we'll get into those full thoughts on my side soon. But let's start with that opening scene, right? You have them introduced as these celestial beings brought to this world, and basically this Minecraft spaceship comes out and drops these guys off during this during some era in 5000 BC or whatnot. What was your thoughts on that opening scene, introducing us to those characters?
It was interesting. We got to see their powers pretty quickly early on in the film. I don't think it's like super compelling, because then it jumps to the present day pretty quickly after just showcasing them fighting the Deviants.
No, and that's something more so important because they're going to have these continual jump back in time to explain something that would occurred, and it slowly gets closer and closer to the present day until the last flashback you have is one that happened 6 or 7 days previously. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a reason for creating that cadence from the start, which you only get having watched the whole thing. But yeah, it's classic Marvel, right? You're getting the superheroes, here's our powers, whatever. It's nothing to sneeze about, other than, do you like seeing their powers? It's kind of important to establish their powers, especially because they are actually a new set of superheroes for the Marvel universe or cinematic universe, compared to what we've seen previously. So it is somewhat important to know what their powers are. And I mean, I don't know. I guess I gave them more grace because clearly they were made for this purpose, and that's what the movie says from the start. Versus some other characters, it's like, why are you here? What are you doing? In this case, it's like, these beings were created to save people, and that's what they do. So, kind of cliche, maybe lame. That's what you get. I don't know. What are your thoughts on the main character? Is the main character compelling?
I think a majority of the Eternals, I'm going to consider Sersi to be the main character. I think that's fair.
Sure.
I didn't find her extremely compelling. Her entire character motivation is, I am fascinated by humanity and I like humans. And it's like, it doesn't get much deeper than that. She also isn't really challenged throughout the movie. She's just the Rey character. She just goes through the movie knowing what to do, when to do it, and even though everyone's gonna die, the most we see is her shed a few tears and then move on.
Yeah, she's more of a sounding board, if you will, for everything else that's going on. And how should we as the audience be feeling about this? Oh, we should be sad because she's sad. Oh, we should be upset because she's upset. That was my general impression of Sersi. Now, that being said, I think that they are not going for Sersi as being the main character in this film. I think they're going for all of them being the main characters of this film. I don't think it works. I think that this is one of those times where they have so many characters, right? There's 10 of them if you include Ajak, to create this team of people and they're all working together. Sure, I don't mind a team up, but even in Guardians of the Galaxy, they had Star-Lord be the main character, and that helped to have a locus for everything to focus on and rotate around, right? That this was the primary dynamic we're dealing with here. Same thing with some of those other team ups, even with the Captain America Civil War movie, right? You have Iron Man, you have Captain America, and they are the central figures for each of the teams. So it's helpful to have that almost like primary guiding figure, if you will. And in this movie, they didn't really have that, especially because while Sersi seemed to be it, or maybe Ikaris, if you wanted to make the case, which I don't think you can, because he turns out, spoiler alert, turns out he's the bad guy. But, you give enough screen time to each of the other individual characters that you don't actually get a strong idea that Sersi is the main character, even though it pretty much starts off with her and leads along with her to a certain degree. Does that make sense?
I mean, you're just supporting the point I made earlier, so.
Yeah, I mean, and that it leads into what you were saying in the way that Sersi's not. She doesn't have character development. I'm just gonna say that from the start. Of all the characters in this film, I actually think she does nothing versus the other characters. You actually have some interesting stuff with a lot of the other characters, actually. I would argue that Thena has a pretty interesting thing going on with her. Gilgamesh, to some degree, along the same vein, right? Because they're interrelated with their interest. Druig was interesting. Didn't love him. Sprite actually has a pretty interesting storyline. I would make the case for, even if you hate her character. I think her arc is one of the stronger arcs in the film. Ikaris, clearly a more interesting character, has a very interesting arc going on. There's a lot of the different characters had at least something going on, and what I loved about the characters especially is that they came from a different place for each of them. That they didn't have, oh, I'm doing this because it's my duty, per se. Each of them had these other motivations guiding how they were acting in the film. And they were very distinct. They weren't the same. Thena's wasn't the same as Gilgamesh's, which wasn't the same as Kingo's, which wasn't the same as Ikaris's, which wasn't the same as Phastos, right? Or Sprite. So I think that was one of the best parts of this film, is that the characters were very distinct and had very different motives and reasons for being there. That being said, it was just so much that you kind of have the Game of Thrones Season 8 scenario where they just wrap everything up at the end, which we'll get to that, but it's too much for a film. And that was my biggest takeaway from this movie, was that this movie, they were trying to do something too grand for a 2-hour-long film. It needed to be a TV show, or it needed to be a multi-part. And you're not going to do a multi-part for a superhero introduction film. So, should have been a TV show.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, I guess we could go through each of the characters if that's helpful. Let's probably start with, no, let's just go through the plot, because I think that the plot has a lot of what we said. Basically, there's these characters, you have them being a team up, they're fighting these beings known as the Deviants. What are your thoughts on the Deviants as one of the opposing forces in this film?
They're not too interesting until you realize that they were created just like the Eternals were. And I mean, even then, I feel like the antagonist of this film is more meant to be the Celestials and then Ikaris. Because the Deviants almost serve as a plot device, and then even though they're building up this like special Deviant, by the end he just fights Thena and that's it.
And that, honestly, that was one of my more disappointing aspects of this film. They were definitely a plot tool at the beginning, and then they actually got interesting with this whole thing where they can talk, and they're consuming the powers of the Eternals, and they now have the ability to speak, and they have this vengeful aspect to them. And it was not very nuanced, but at least it was interesting, especially when you hear I think it was Bill Skarsgård was the voice actor, or he was one of the voice actors for the Deviants. Anyways, like they were starting to get interesting, and then they just turn into another plot device where Thena at the end just slices him into bits, and he's nothing. So, yeah, it was disappointing as a creature, but it turns out, right, they were created by the celestial Arishem. What are your thoughts on Arishem as this being that created both the Eternals and the Deviants, and turns out to be a somewhat menacing evil force in the universe?
I have thoughts.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think it's like they're playing with this themes of like godhood, if you will. And Arishem is more representing this god who is striving for this ultimate good. He has like this end goal in mind, and humanity's death is a sacrifice he's willing to make for the birth of another celestial. He kind of views sentient life as expendable for the greater good. It's just utilitarianism. The most amount of good for the most amount of people. In his mind, Earth is a planet being used to host the birth of a celestial, and if they all die, so be it. And that's what the Eternals were created for. I will say there's like this interesting, and when I say interesting, I mean that in more of a bad way, thing they go for where he tells the Eternals they were created different from the Deviants because they can't evolve, and yet clearly every single one of them has. So this guy must just suck at creating sentient life.
Well, I that I did notice that. I didn't think it was as developed per se as what it seemed like the Deviants were, so I didn't give that too much of a beef. My bigger question was, why did he create the Deviants to begin with? Because if you look at them, they look like these creatures that are clearly just there to eat things. And if you're
Yeah.
trying to increase the population of a planet for the sake of consuming it, why do you have these things that clearly just eat things on this planet you want to consume with, I don't
According to
know,
him, they
like
were only
8
meant to
billion?
consume predators, but at the same time, it's like,
Yeah,
if they run out of predators, they're gonna keep eating.
right.
Why
I
not
don't
just send these Eternals to begin with?
know. Yeah. And that's the first sign of many that the film had some definite weak links in how it was doing things, which get more obvious as the story progresses. But as it turns out, Ajak knew of the desire of the Celestial being Arishem from the start, and she was helping to cultivate this regardless, right? And she ends up telling Ikaris that was going to be the case, and this leads to hit some fallout in Ikaris's life, and eventually terminates into Ikaris being convinced this is the way things are supposed to go, and he works to assure that. And when Ajak turns against the Celestial, he ends up killing Ajak. What are your thoughts on Ikaris? This revelation, him as a character? I think it's worth having that discussion.
Ikaris, I think, is interesting in the sense that he is given a like he very clearly sees himself as the most powerful, and I think as the movie plays out, you realize that as well. Like he is the Superman character. He flies. He's got laser eyes, super strength. It takes all of well, not all of them, but most of the other Eternals to even restrain him, much less kill him. Um, and he has like he sees himself like the protector of this group, and so even with the secret, he's protecting them from this truth that they're all just there to kill humanity, pretty much. They're just raising livestock to be slaughtered. And then it's almost like towards the end of the movie when she confronts him with her decision to turn against the Celestial, he's coming not from a place of like, I love the Celestial, this is my purpose in life. It's more of a place of, if you're turning against him now, then my life has been a lie up until this point. The last 5,000 years of me protecting your secret and protecting everyone from this, and you telling me that was my job, my purpose in life, is a lie. And I can't have that be a lie. That has to be the truth of like why I was created. Um, and so he kills her. He can't have her defeating his purpose. I also think it goes to the idea of like, and a lot of the Eternals echo this of the seeking a purpose. Like they were given the job of defeating the Deviants, but once that's done, what are we for? Like what do we do with ourselves? The only other place I really see this come up is Clone Wars. Uh, um, you have the clone troopers. They're created for the purpose of a war, and there are multiple instances where they question what do we do with ourselves after the war is over. We were created in a lab for the sole purpose of being experts in combat and being superior to all other forms of a military. But when that war is over, what do we do with ourselves? And I think it's an interesting question to be asked. But as the movie progresses, Ikaris kind of devolves and then flies into the sun. He's just like, oh,
Yeah.
shoot, I didn't protect them well enough. Well, guess we gotta die.
Well, yeah, I mean, well, so many different ways to go with that. But yes, you're not wrong. The transition of Ikaris from being this protector of them to being this protector of the celestial secret, if you will, is interesting. Partially because, yeah, like you said, it means that his whole life was a lie. And then also, I think there is some degree of this understanding that the celestial remakes them, if you will, every time they go to a new planet, which is one of the primary things about an understanding of how this celestial Arishem works, is that every time he's going to make a new celestial, he sends the Eternals there ahead of time to help cultivate this planet until it births a new celestial. So that's the idea. And then I guess there's this underlying idea that you get at least with Kingo, where they go, I will see you at the next planet, more or less. Even if I don't remember, at least we'll all be together again if we do it this way. Versus there's some question of if that's going to be the case, as Ajak then, Ajak dies, then Gilgamesh dies, and there's questions like who else is going to die here, right? If we at least go along with the plan, there's some sense in which we will at least get to continue to be the group that we are, right? Sure, it's not ideal, sure, it's whatever, but there is some sense of that playing out. And you see that especially with Sprite and how she deals with the situation is, well, I'm not going to say no to this because I want to be with Ikaris. And part of that is romantic, right? It's not purely this, like, oh, I just want to be with the team. But there's also a sense in which there is this underlying aspect of these people are getting lost. If we save the planet, are we really going to continue to be a group? Will people be revived by Arishem? We don't know. So there's some of these ideas playing alongside this idea of the great god Arishem, of how is he going to do things, what is right, what is wrong, who should be playing God, right? So the ideas are interesting, and Ikaris is probably the main locus of the opposing side, right? You have, oh, it's clearly good to stick with your family no matter what and to save humanity. And then there's Ikaris saying, I was created for this purpose, and these other personal conflicting emotions, if you will, that are played out in him. So he had a lot of great things going for him. And, it's the guy who plays Rob Stark. So, of course, he's amazing. Top tier. Who couldn't like him? Yeah, I mean, it devolves by the end of the film. So, that's probably worth saying. I think the clearest, example of that is when Phastos is using these flying droid things to try to shoot Ikaris, and he's shooting them out of the sky with his laser eyes, and then he throws these restraints on him, and those work, and Ikaris isn't able to escape when he could clearly just look at them and blast them with his laser eyes, like he was just doing to Phastos' other machines. That was probably the biggest vision in my mind of this is not making sense when you were just doing the other thing. It doesn't work now. I don't know. Seriously took me out of the movie as a element of how the movie worked. But I don't know what your thoughts are on how the movie devolved around Ikaris.
I actually didn't have a problem with the restraints. And the reason why is when you watch the scene, he does try to use his eyes, but it makes it seem as if all of his, like, remember they talk about harvesting this energy that's within them. Um, the restraints have like this energy pulsing through them, and then he tries to use his laser eyes, and they don't work. They go like 10 feet, and that's it. And so I think the implication is he's unable to do so because the restraints themselves are like siphoning off his celestial energy. I think he devolves much more at the point in which he just joins in with Sersi's little thing we can't say. And just they become part of the Unimind to turn the Celestial into presumably adamantium.
Yeah, the Unimind is one of the dumbest elements I've ever heard described. Sounds like something one of the little green aliens came up with from Toy Story. So I don't know where they thought this was a good name for it, but yeah, that's a endless opportunity for mockery there. But yeah, I mean, the I didn't love, but I didn't hate his transition back to being quote unquote good, right? Partially because it was around this whole romantic relationship between him and Sersi, which had gone on for like 5,000 years or something insane like that. So it was like, of all of the people that would turn Ikaris back to being good, it would be remembering this entire relationship he had with her, and the idea of just killing this person was too much for him. I got that. It wasn't perfect, right? And then the idea that even though he didn't have this bracelet on, I guess the celestial being decided to connect them, even though the celestial being was questioning everything they did, seemed weird. Or I just it devolved in regards to clarity as to who had the power, where the power came from, and what exactly was even going on. So yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. And him just being like, okay, now that I've turned back to the good side, now I'm just gonna kill myself because I killed Ajak. So deuces out, my lady.
Can't live with the guilt.
There wasn't even a conversation really around it. It was just deuces, and then he was gone. And so I don't know. It just seemed like they wanted that team up ending that you got at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, right? Where everyone holds hands in a soul searching way and was happy, right? And that's what they wanted, and that's what they wanted to force into the film. And at the end, you go, well, he was kind of the bad guy. Like, and sure, he had somewhat of an interesting arc, but it's not clear why he's now joining in on this thing.
Yep.
Okay. We'll move on. I mean, I don't think there's more to say on that other than it creates the celestial made of adamantium, I think it was, by the end of the film, which they use as an element in Brave New World. So, cue that garbage dump. But coming back to this film, did you think that the story was... Well, let's talk about how compelling the story was overall, the themes and messages of it coming full circle, if that's convincing, and then we'll get to some of the characters individually.
I think the story overall, right? We've both echoed this at this point. They're doing so much. They're going through this grand, massive amount of themes and twists and characters and messages. I don't know that any message really comes off as being particularly strong. It's more like they're just throwing out questions, and it's just like Moon Knight saying random stuff go. Like they're posing a lot of questions, but they're not truly giving too many answers. And if they are, they're almost like half-hearted. And they're not fully drawn out, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I think the second part is the bigger point of this, because I would argue they do have two primary themes in this film, which is one of the reasons I thought this film was interesting. And one of them we discussed already, right? The idea of playing God, right? Who's in charge here? What is right and what is wrong when it comes to having control over the lives of billions of people, right? And I think a secondary one underneath that would be responsibility, right? What is your duty in your role? and that's somewhat discussed as well. But the other primary one is this idea of family and sticking together as family, and that's definitely the theme they keep coming back to as a group that creates some level of focus between the characters. So I think that at least that was explained, but more importantly, they're very shallow in regards to how they discuss them, right? You have, oh, we are family, we should stick together. Why? Because we're family and we should stick together. And this idea of, oh, he's playing God. That's bad. And that's pretty much what you get. So, sure, they discuss these themes, and they are interesting themes to discuss, especially in relation to each other, right? What are you supposed to do when you're a celestial being that has a... I guess that's separate from actual celestials here, so I should clarify. When you're an eternal and have life for who knows how long, and you have this responsibility to this God who created you, and then you have this idea of caring for individuals within that group and with amongst each other. What are your responsibilities there? It is an interesting discussion because none of us as humans have that long-term perspective of 7,000 years. So it definitely provides an interesting dynamic to be had. And then it turns into a shallow discussion on we're friends till the end. So, yay. Classic Disney, going back to the power of friendship. Yeah, okay. So what are your thoughts on some of the other characters we haven't discussed? Thoughts on... Sure, let's go with Kingo, because he's probably one of the more entertaining characters in this film. And these don't need to be long discussions. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on him.
Hey, he's interesting. He has his own motivations and still cares about his family. But I think something about the entire cast as well, right? They all are different in their motivations, why they're here, but also like what drives them in their own personal lives too, right? After they defeat the Deviants. But they're all very shallow too. So like Kingo is basically, I am a movie star and I like making lots of money and being famous with these people. But at the same time, he doesn't seem to really care about the fact that they're all going to die either. And so by the end, he just wipes his hands of the whole thing and walks away. And says he won't fight them, but he's also not going to help them. I didn't have too many thoughts in there. They don't like make him super compelling.
No, and he's more so a element. He's definitely one of the less compelling characters, for sure. He does end up going against that, though. He says, oh, I'm not going to work for or against you guys. And then he ends up working for them to help fight Ikaris and the Deviant and all that stuff. So, turns out that was a lie. But, yeah, I think that he's definitely... I would just echo everything that you've said. It does remind me again of one of the issues with this film is in the middle of the film, he is the spirit leader of saying, oh, what should we do, Ikaris? Because you're the leader, even though Sersi was given the orb, everyone looks to Ikaris. And what does Ikaris say? Ikaris says, Sersi should decide. And then you have this flashback where he was the one that killed Ajak, and he wanted the Celestial to be born. And then he comes back and says, I'm going to stop you all myself. If he really wanted the Celestial to be born, he would have taken the reins in that moment and said, we're going to do nothing. We're going to let the Celestial do what he was always going to do. Why? Because he makes that decision anyways later. So the idea that he just shoved off responsibility to Sersi doesn't make any sense, especially because he already sees it as his responsibility to make sure the Celestial is born. So yeah, I mean, like, another one of the many problems that you see in this film. You can feel free to push back if you have any discussion on that, but that was my biggest takeaway with Ikaris was he was the main champion of, besides, I guess, Sprite, in a more subtle way. But the main champion of Ikaris and Kingo's like, oh, we should follow him, and I'm going to support you no matter what, even when Ikaris rejects that responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much pushback there, especially as far as Kingo. He's just, I feel like he's more there for comedic relief than anything.
Yeah.
Especially with his little attaché, his little buddy.
Yeah, Kuman, I believe his name was. Something like that. For sure.
Infinite cameras.
It was pretty funny. He was definitely a good add in regards to a character in the film as a side comedic relief. What were your thoughts on Sprite, since I mentioned her briefly? Do you think she is a compelling character?
So, you made a comment earlier that you think she's compelling even if I hate her. I think Gabi is compelling even though I hate her.
That's an Attack on Titan reference for you who are not familiar with an amazing show.
I think there are still elements to her where like they ask questions but don't really answer them. At least not for her character. They may answer them for the audience in some way. But like she has this conversation with Kingo where she's like, "Why did Arishem make me this way?" And he doesn't really give her an answer. He's just like, "I don't know." And then we're kind of given an answer later when Arishem says that he made them to help the humans produce enough more humans so that the celestial can be born. But at the same time, we're still not given an answer as to why she's made to look like a kid.
Yeah, I don't have pushback on that specifically. That's a very, like, it is a point in her character.
Well, because her whole struggle, right, is that she aside from like the idea of like I was made into this eternal. I was sent to Earth, and now I want things I didn't even know that I wanted before. And by the end, she has Sersi basically turn her into a human. Little Mermaid, go Burr. But we're never, like, her being a child is this massive motivator for her. But we're never given a rationale as to why we just have this childlike eternal.
Sure, I guess I didn't really think of that specifically as, well, why was she a child to begin with? I didn't, more so than this was the baseline she was starting from, right? And I took that as it was and moved forward with it in my mind as this is how she was created, whatever. I wouldn't say she's my favorite character, but I would say that her arc as a whole has a lot more development, is a lot more interesting. In all of the characters' dynamics, hers is the one they definitely play with the most in regards to her individual struggles, being like, I look like a child and I'm 5,000 years old. Like, what is going on here? This is insane. And stuff like that. So, sure, I see where you're coming from with that. It's more so just, they took 10 characters, right, and decided we're going to make a story about all of them. And we're going to discuss all of them. And of all of the characters that they actually discuss and go into depth with, she was probably the main one, other than Ikaris. And having a full discussion of what that looks like. And she's definitely a side character. She's not the main character. If you want to make a case that one of them is, it's not her. But she has something going there. That was more of where I was coming from. And I think that her arc actually has an arc where she goes from, I want this and I can't have it, I'm going to, go with Ikaris, and then she comes back and says, well, now I'm going to get what I wanted eventually and become full-on human and grow up and die eventually, just like everyone else does. So, I don't know. It doesn't make the movie, right? But at least there was something there, and I appreciated that, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess it doesn't sound as good coming out of my mouth than what it did in my brain, but there we go.
Well, I mean, right, I do think you're right in the sense that they play with her character more, so she has more opportunities to develop. I just don't think that still terminates as well as it should have, right? Because they're not playing with it as much as they should.
Sure. Well,
Especially,
yeah.
like,
I don't think they. I don't think any of them do really.
yeah, exactly.
So
I think the types of questions and her character as a whole would make for an interesting backdrop for a main character. There is a lot you could do with her, right? I think there are some other characters you could do a lot with. They just never get the opportunity to. And Sersi being the one who's put in the spotlight all the time also hurts this as well, because her character doesn't get any of those interesting ideas and questions being asked, like you do with Thena, like you do with um, Druig, even. Like, you could do more interesting stuff with him. They're, like, the premise, they give a lot of really good premises, and then they don't follow through by the end.
mm-hmm. Sure. And that's definitely fair. Just going alongside that, what are your thoughts on Druig as a character?
With Druig, I thought his premise was more interesting than most of the other Eternals. I don't think that it terminates well, right? But I think that the idea, right, that he has the ability to control the minds of these beings, and he sees all of this chaos and death around him, and he just wants it to stop. And unlike the other Eternals, who would have to physically restrain everyone, he can just do it seamlessly, effortlessly almost. And he does. He eventually gets so fed up with it that he just can't handle it anymore. He's like, "Screw you guys. I'm done watching humans kill each other like they have been for like the past 5,000 years, or several thousand years, however long they've been there." And then he splits off from the group. And then by the end of the movie, he's like, "Wow, so okay, we were just here to harvest livestock. That's great. My life was a lie."
Yeah, and they hint at some really, really interesting ideas and themes around that are related to some of their main themes with him, right? This idea of playing God. He's in some ways playing God himself, and there's this. They kind of hint at it when they say, "Oh, stop!" and they keep telling Druig, You really shouldn't be doing this," because in some ways he's controlling them just as much as uh, the Celestials controlling the Eternals, right? So there is some question as to the legitimacy of what he's doing, but he's like, this is the better option, right? The better option is that humans stop killing each other, and I can make that happen because I have the ability to control their minds. So it's definitely, he's an interesting character with an interesting premise, exactly like you said.
I do think he also, of all of the Eternals, really emphasizes this idea they are pushing of like free will
Mm-hmm.
amongst both the Eternals when it comes to Arishem, and then humanity when it comes to the Eternals and Arishem, and then even to a smaller scale, um, what is his name? I don't know, Druig. And like someone's ability to choose. Um, we don't really get a great answer there, but it's a question. They asked it,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
posed it, and moved on.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
all that to say, just beginning of the movie, looking at all the Eternals, I found Druig the most interesting. As the film progresses, he kind of falls apart like the rest of them.
Yeah, and you get the same type of thing with Thena, in my opinion, where I think she starts off very interesting. This idea that she has she's turning evil, if you will, randomly, and she can't really control it. They don't really know why, and so they isolate her and say, you need to figure this out. And she doesn't know what's going on either. And so there is this whole dynamic with her of just not understanding and trying to figure that out. And it just turns into this very basic mantra of, I am being controlled against my will, if you know, and you have to face your inner demons. And it just gets rehashed over and over until she says, yes, I will face my demons. Ha ha, deviant, you are dead.
I will say also Athena's character, it's really weird to me because there's no indication we're given in this film that after the revelation that their memories have been taken, that they retain those memories, right? We're to presume they still don't have those memories. They're just aware of the fact that they have existed for eons at this point. And so Thena just suddenly healing from her like problem throughout the movie, which was I will like randomly turn on my allies. The last time she does it is in the Amazon rainforest. And it's interesting also because throughout the movie, we're given the indication that under times of duress is when she's more likely to switch. And so, like, she does it when they're fighting. Pretty much every time she's done it is when she is fighting a deviant, other than when she's in Australia with, why am I forgetting his name? Bobby Lee. What's his?
You're
What's
talking
his
about
name?
Gilgamesh?
Yes, Gilgamesh. Other than that instance, every time she's turned has been in like a time of intense stress for her. And then at the end, she's just able to not turn at all. She's just her normal self. And she fights off this deviant with flying colors. So I think that was just more of an obvious instance in my mind of when a character fell apart, rather than just little bits and pieces. It was like a very specific thing that had occurred.
Yeah, I see somewhat what you're saying, and that's probably why they have her specifically kill the deviant. So it somewhat makes sense, but it just plays into the idea that the deviant felt like a side plot by the end of the film more than anything. More so to serve her purposes, which is, I guess, fine. In regards to her having those memories, I go back and forth. I see what you're saying. I mean, the memories were literally stored at a separate location on this random planet, it looks like, or space station that the Celestial made them all at. So, not clear how memories that were completely separated from them were able to come to her, but it sounded like some sort of glitch when she was remade, was the idea. Why that didn't happen until the conquistadors decided to massacre the Native Americans, not clear, but I don't know. It's another just question.
Of Native Americans.
My bad. Okay.
One is much more gruesome than the other.
True. We're not going to talk about the child sacrifice that was going on there, but anyways, what's next? Okay, who are we missing? We kind of talked about Gilgamesh with Thena, unless you have more to say on him.
I mean, he's kind of disappointing too, in the sense that like he doesn't really have any major questions he asks. He's just there to further Thena's plot line. He has a cool power. Like, I like his little thunder fists that he gets, but yeah, he doesn't, like, of all the characters, he has even less depth than some. And so he's kind of, I put him in the cart with Makari, where he has a personality, but he doesn't really have development.
Sure. Well, I would say that he has. Sure. I would probably put him closer to Kingo in regards to how much I think he adds to the film. But yeah, I mean, I think Makari's like the bottom of the barrel.
Yes.
She's literally just present and can run fast.
Yes. I think he does add to the film.
She doesn't say, she literally says nothing in the film.
No, she does.
Okay.
You might have to cut that out. Yes. I'm not saying he is equivalent to Makari in the sense that he doesn't add much, but he's equivalent to Makari in that his character, like Kingo's, doesn't have, like, depth or development.
Yeah, sure. They are, of the characters, they have interesting motivations, individual motivations for being there, and that was the most they added to the film, right?
Yeah.
They were distinct, and they were somewhat coming from a place of their own individual relevance, and that's what you got. What are your thoughts on Phastos?
I didn't like his character.
Is that it?
Well, shall we go into it? Let's see. Basically just takes pieces of other... He's the one Eternal that isn't unique. Other than the fact that he can create things, right? He wants to help humanity develop. but he comes to the same conclusions that other Eternals already have. Like, oh, humanity was wrong, and he says Druig was right. Therefore, I remove myself from humanity. Now, his solution is different, but he also doesn't have the same abilities that Druig had. His abilities are to create technology.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from with that. I definitely think that Phastos is not one of the more compelling characters. It is interesting because he's trying to help humanity, and Ajak in some ways is holding him back. But then also, the advancement of society would enable them to produce faster, aka make a celestial earlier. So there was some question as to why he was being held back if their original purpose was to advance the number of human beings on the planet, right? Because he was the one that was one of the most pro humans existence and cultivating that. So if the celestial was encouraging that, why don't he just go, yeah, give them the best medicine there is, let them populate like bunny rabbits so that we can get this train going faster, you know? It wasn't clear
Well,
why he was being held back, at
I
least
think
to me.
I think there's also so many instances in this movie where their explanations for why they do or do not do things is so weak. Another one, Thanos wiping out half the Earth's population. You'd think that the Eternals would be told to help stop Thanos if he's going to wipe out half of life on Earth, because that means the Celestial can't be born. But instead, they stand by and do nothing. Um, when it comes to war, not interfering in war, war ends up with more people dying. World War II, hello. The Civil War, the World War One, the Mongols. There's so many instances, but we're
Yeah.
only stopping the Deviants because the Deviants were the ones who are preventing humans from progressing, I guess. Um, we're just, I think it's a big, big plot hole in terms of the purpose of the Eternals and how they interact and conduct themselves in relation to the rest of humanity.
Well,
And I think
and
I
you,
think that Phastos is a good example of this too.
yeah. Well, and I think in regards to that, just a little bit of pushback is the explanation they give, which is, oh, well, when you have war, all of these other ancillary benefits occur, which are the advancement of medicine to help solve problems on the battlefield, etc., that has led to the society we exist in today, right? At the very least, I think that needs to be addressed.
At least Phastos. But I guess my problem with that is, in this world, Phastos could have created all of those things for them in the absence of war. So in the ideal situation of truly just raising livestock, they would have just given them everything they need, prevented them from fighting, waited until they had populated the Earth enough, and then boom, you have a celestial.
Yeah. Advance this by at least 2,000 years.
Yeah.
At least. Yeah, 100%. I think Phastos definitely could have made that happen. And if the Celestial was really trying to do that if his pure motivation was the creation of livestock fodder, which, to play the devil's advocate again, maybe that's not the case. There is some idea that he's trying to make a more or less theistic or integration with this world where he sets everything out there and then holds back and doesn't do a ton. Which, if you want to play with the god complex more, maybe that's what they're going for, in that he's not trying to be morally responsible for what humans decide to do on Earth. He's just trying to be responsible for what he's caused, from Arishem's perspective, to be clear.
Yeah. I mean, in all seriousness, I think my biggest problem with Phastos is just that he makes the plot holes that already exist in terms of like, why don't the Eternals intervene in certain instances more apparent, because he of all of them has the ability to advance human society at a pace none of them could even dream of. And him being held back is just like, I don't think they give a very good answer to that question.
Yeah, 100%.
Because all the other ones, right, are built to destroy deviants. Ikaris is very clearly the powerhouse to beat up these deviants.
They even make fun of it, where Phastos' son says, "Oh, it's Superman," right?
Yeah, exactly. And you've got why am I forgetting the Indian guy's name? There's so many
Kingo?
of them. Yes, Kingo. I think it's funny you watched it one time and you must have their names written down somewhere, to be honest. I was gonna say, Kingo, right? He can make these like energy blasts. And then you've got Sprite, who can make illusions. She's basically just Loki. I mean, she even stabs someone in the back. And so most of them are built to fight against the deviants, and they have some power or ability that enables them to do so. I mean, Thena and Gilgamesh, obviously, right? They literally just make weapons with their hands, as opposed to Ajak, who's there to make sure they survive. She can repair them, and then Phastos, whose job is to advance human society. And you see that too. He's never a part of the fight. Whenever they're fighting the deviants, he's always absent, as is Ajak. They're both on the ship, just observing. So, yeah, anyways.
Yeah, no, that's true. Anyways, do you have anything else to say on Ajak?
Her character, like, existed for maybe 15 minutes.
She was a plot device.
Literally, yeah. And it's weird because she's meant to be the leader of these Eternals, and she has even less development than all of the other side characters.
Facts.
So,
speaking of the side characters, what are your thoughts on Kit Harington showing up in this movie, Andrew?
Most base character in this film.
For the audience's perspective, we didn't really discuss this, but Sersi has a love interest with a human being who turns out to be Jon Snow.
Yes, and Jon Snow and Robb Stark are both fighting over Sersi. That's a Game of Thrones reference for you. I have very little, if any, actually, context for the Eternals going into this movie, right? I have some background knowledge when it comes to comics for most of the Marvel characters. We've been introduced to it up to this point, to varying degrees, right? I'd have more knowledge of, say, Spider-Man than, like, Black Widow. Black Knight, which is who Kit Harington's character ends up becoming, is a very interesting character. He's got this sword that it corrupts its wielders, and there have been other Black Knights throughout his family history that have been evil, and he is the current one. I think they do a lot of little subtle hints throughout the movie, and I think it was interesting throwing him in there. I don't know that Black Knight ever really interacts with the Eternals. It was an interesting way to introduce him. And in the end credit scene, you get Blade behind him, asking him if he's really ready to take on this responsibility of picking up the sword. In terms of end credit scenes that were never fulfilled on, both end credit scenes in this movie sucked. I think the second one with Blade and Black Knight was really cool. And you got to see the sword, you got to see him open the case, all that. We have gotten literally nothing since then. Other than the announcement of a Blade movie, we have seen neither one of these characters show up, which I think is a lot of wasted potential. Instead, we're making Ironheart TV shows that nobody cares about, honestly. And if some people do, it's not the majority of the people that would go to see Marvel movies. So it's interesting decisions on the part of Marvel, especially since they've brought in the Russo brothers to make their Doomsday movie, and they've said they're reworking things and canceling all these projects, and yet most of the projects they're coming out with still aren't of great interest and aren't really good stories overall, right? We got Captain America Brave New World. We've gotten Ironheart. The best thing we've gotten in recent time, I guess, would be Thunderbolts. which we both talked about isn't the strongest movie, but at least it has a lot of things going for it.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, and that's
oh,
an
go ahead.
interesting point to make because it's almost like the Marvel Cinematic Universe took something like the Eternals, right? Which wasn't a blockbuster compared to what they had been getting with Captain America and the Avengers and all these other things, and they decided, let's cut back, right? Let's try to really focus on what we're good at. And what they said they were good at was Avengers movies, Captain America movies, Iron Man movies, and so let's just make those characters again with a different face rather
Yeah.
than focusing on the core storytelling and making compelling characters. They looked at, let's take these individual powers and reintegrate them into a new being, right? Not what we were looking for. At the end of the day, Iron Man is compelling not because he's a man in a suit, but because he's got this compelling story around him. Who he is, what he's doing, why he's there, what he struggles with, right? Same thing to some degree with Captain America, right? And we've had those discussions. We're going to have the discussion on the Avengers pretty soon, right? So all of these things have these dynamics playing in them, and they are interesting. But when it comes to this new stuff, they just lack that fundamental surrounding elements that are critical to making a good story.
So we talked about the second Doctor Strange movie, right? And how they did some weird stuff there. This is me more hypothesizing on what I think they could have done to make certain characters more interesting. Midnight Suns movie or TV show, right? We've got Doctor Strange already. We've got Moon Knight already. They announced Blade at the end of this movie. You've got Black Knight. They have the rights to the X-Men now, so we can have characters like Magic and Wolverine. There's some way they could introduce Iron Fist. Like they have so many interesting new characters we haven't seen yet, and it's like they're just sitting there looking at the profits they made over a decade ago now, asking how do we recreate this instead of how do we create more new compelling characters. And like they've already done that to some extent. Like they made the Moon Knight TV show and then left it, and we haven't heard from the man since. Um,
Right.
and now they have the rights to the X-Men, and what are they doing with it? They're just throwing all of these actors who were in movies over 10 years ago, 15 years ago, some of them, into this Doomsday movie, and it's just a cash grab. And it's one of the most disappointing things ever because you have Marvel in the early like to mid 2000, oh, I guess 2010s, right? 2008 was when Iron Man came out, and then like towards 2015, they're introducing all of these new interesting characters, like Guardians of the Galaxy. Prior to that movie, my perception was most people didn't really know a ton about them, but they made them this fun, enjoyable group to watch. You get other characters throughout the Marvel universe, like Doctor Strange. Not many people knew who Doctor Strange was, right? You have people who know Iron Man and the main Avengers, but you're slowly incorporating all of these characters that are known but not that well known. And that I think that was where their real success came from, right? They take a lot of well-established characters, put them in a universe. That's what draws the crowd. Once you have the crowd, they start incorporating newer characters who are interesting but not as well known. They make them like fan favorites, right? And then they get to Endgame and they go, well, we can't introduce any new ones, even though we've killed off the old cast. We're just going to stick to the old cast and not do anything new. And I think that's where their fall comes in because they're no longer doing what they were really good at, which was taking new characters, making them characters that you could relate to and enjoy watching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the core of it, is they don't understand that they need to look at these new, even if you are going to make a new Iron Man in the character of Ironheart, right? Which I haven't watched, probably won't, but it's because of the precedent we've had recently with other Marvel content, right? They are not taking the idea of these new characters, even if you're going to reuse the idea of Iron Man and Ironheart, this needs to be seen as a new character and introduced in the same method that you've introduced them in the earliest iterations of these characters, right? And really build that story.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too when you look at a lot of these young Avengers, if you will, that they've introduced so far. Like Kate Bishop, what is she? She's just Hawkeye, but a girl. Ironheart, Iron Man, but a girl. Sam Wilson. Now he's just Captain America, but a black guy. You have what's her name? Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan. She's just Captain Marvel, but a kid and Indian. And so their identities are wrapped up in these other characters we've already gotten and seen and followed their development and story and the termination of that. And they're just like, let's just put that character into another body and give them another name. Whereas, like, you look at some characters, Spider-Man, right? They kind of did the whole, he's been mentored by Iron Man, but he's his own character, right? Winter Soldier. He's similar to Captain America. He's his own character. I think the best instance is probably Yelena. She's almost exactly like Black Widow in terms of her skill set, if you will. But she's completely her own character. She's unique. She has her own flaws, her own motivations. She doesn't find her identity as a superhero in Black Widow. And so that's what we need. You can have characters with similar powers, but having constantly calling back to the person that you're drawing inspiration from just drowns out the character themselves, and it just whitewashes them into just being a template for you to like copy and paste this other character onto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. Which is one of the reasons Thunderbolts was one of the better things that's come out in the last 10 years. And
exactly.
that's not what you got with Eternals in 2021. So hopefully we'll get that coming in the future. Will we have good content? We'll have to see.
Well, Fantastic Four is right around the corner.
That's true. You will see that coming up. We very likely will review that. So if you're curious, keep listening. But as for today, we're done. We will see you all next time.